Picture this. You're one of the most brilliant minds in the entire Roman Empire. A woman who has broken every barrier imaginable in a world that barely acknowledges your gender exists beyond childbirth and household management. You teach mathematics that would make modern professors weep. You advise the most powerful men in Egypt, and your lectures draw crowds like a rock concert in ancient Alexandria. Then one morning in March 415 CE, you step into your carriage for your daily commute, completely unaware that a mob of religious fanatics has been watching you, waiting for you, praying for your death. Within hours, you'll be dragged into a church, stripped naked before a jeering crowd, and torn apart with fragments of broken pottery, while men who call themselves servants of God scrape the flesh from your bones. This isn't some medieval legend or Gothic horror story. This is what happened to Hypatia of Alexandria, and the men who butchered her would never face a single day of punishment. Welcome to the moment when religious authority decided that women who think too much need to be silenced in the most horrific way possible. Alexandria in the late 4th century was supposed to be civilized, enlightened, the crown jewel of intellectual achievement in the known world. For 700 years, this city had been the place where the greatest minds gathered, where the famous library had collected the wisdom of entire civilizations, where Greek philosophy and Egyptian mysticism blended into something extraordinary. But by Hypatia's time, that golden age was rotting from within, consumed by religious violence that made the streets run red with alarming frequency. The Christians and pagans weren't just disagreeing politely over wine at dinner parties. They were forming militias, burning temples, destroying anything that represented the old ways, and standing right in the crossfire, refusing to bend, refusing to hide, was this impossibly brilliant woman who had the audacity to believe her mind mattered more than her gender or her religion. Hypatia didn't just teach philosophy like some dusty academic mumbling about Plato in a forgotten corner. She was the Beyoncé of Neoplatonism, the Einstein of ancient mathematics, the woman everyone wanted to study under because she could explain the mysteries of the universe in ways that made your brain hurt in the best possible way. Her father Theon had been the last recorded member of Alexandria's legendary museum, and he'd trained his daughter like she was going to save civilization itself. Maybe he knew what was coming. Maybe he understood that the world was changing, that the space for free thought was shrinking, and his daughter needed to be so brilliant, so undeniable, that not even the rising tide of religious fanaticism could touch her. He was wrong, of course. Brilliance doesn't stop a mob with pottery shards and righteous fury. What made Hypatia dangerous, truly dangerous, wasn't just that she was smart. Plenty of men were smart, and they got to keep breathing. No, Hypatia's crime was that she refused to stay in her lane. She walked through Alexandria's streets without a male guardian, dressed in the philosopher's cloak, and appeared before magistrates to offer political advice like she had every right to be there. And here is the thing that would have driven the Christian patriarchs absolutely insane. Everyone listened to her. The Roman prefect Orestes, the most powerful man in Egypt, sought her counsel regularly. Students traveled from across the empire to sit at her feet. Both pagans and Christians attended her lectures, because truth, apparently, didn't care about your baptismal status. She'd created this impossible space where learning mattered more than which invisible deity you prayed to. And in a world rapidly dividing itself into camps of us versus them, that kind of neutrality was more threatening than any pagan temple. Then Cyril became Patriarch of Alexandria in 412 CE, and suddenly Hypatia's days were numbered. Cyril wasn't interested in coexistence or intellectual dialogue. He looked at Alexandria's diversity, its mix of Jews and pagans and Christians of various flavors, and saw an infestation that needed to be purged. Within 2 years, he'd driven most of the Jewish population out of the city in a pogrom that would make modern historians wince. He seized their synagogues, confiscated their property, and basically told them to convert or get out. When Prefect Orestes complained to Constantinople that maybe, just maybe, violently expelling an entire religious community was bad governance, Cyril responded by summoning 500 monks from the desert monasteries. These weren't gentle men of prayer. These were the Taliban of late antiquity, religious extremists who spent years in the wasteland, convincing themselves that anyone who disagreed with them was literally demonic. They surrounded Orestes in the streets, accused him of paganism, and when he insisted he was a baptized Christian, one of them threw a rock that split his forehead open. The monk's name was Ammonius, and when Orestes had him executed for assaulting the emperor's representative, Cyril declared him a martyr and gave him a church funeral. Let that sink in. A man who committed assault and battery on a government official became a saint because he did it in God's name. This was the world Hypatia was living in, where violence against authority was holy if you wrapped it in scripture. The Parabolani were Cyril's personal death squad, and they'd been waiting for permission to eliminate the one person standing between the patriarch and total control of Alexandria. Originally, these men were supposed to care for sick and dying Christians, a charitable organization that helped during plagues and disasters. But Cyril had transformed them into something grotesque, a militia of perhaps 800 men drawn from Alexandria's poorest classes, men who had nothing to lose and everything to gain by proving their devotion to the church. They'd already helped drive out the Jews, had burned pagan temples with gleeful enthusiasm, and now they had their sights set on the woman they believed was a witch, who de-enchanted the prefect with her unholy learning. Because obviously, the only reason a powerful man would listen to a woman was sorcery, right? It couldn't possibly be that she was smarter than everyone else in the room. In March 415 CE, during Lent of all times, when Christians were supposed to be reflecting on peace and forgiveness, the Parabolani made their move. They knew Hypatia's schedule, knew exactly when she'd be returning home from her daily lectures, knew which route her chariot would take through the city. Their leader was Peter, a lector who read scripture during church services, a man whose voice probably sounded reassuring when he was reciting psalms, but turned ice cold when he was organizing a lynching. They ambushed her carriage in broad daylight on one of Alexandria's main thoroughfares, pulled her from the vehicle while crowds watched, and dragged her toward the Caesareum. This wasn't some random act of mob violence in a dark alley. This was a public execution, performed in full view of the city, and not a single person tried to stop it, because everyone understood what happened to people who interfered with God's work. The Caesareum had once been a temple to the Roman imperial cult, a magnificent structure that represented the old world's power and glory. Cyril had claimed it as his headquarters, transforming it into a Christian church, and now his men were about to perform a ritual murder in its sacred space. Then they grabbed ostraca, those sharp fragments of broken pottery and roof tiles that littered every ancient city, and they began to scrape her flesh from her bones. Not a quick death, not a merciful beheading or strangling. They took their time, using crude implements to flay her alive while she screamed in a church dedicated to the religion of love and forgiveness. Socrates Scholasticus, the Christian historian who documented this atrocity within a generation of its occurrence, couldn't bring himself to describe the full horror of what they did, but he made it clear they killed her with those pottery shards, that her death was prolonged and agonizing, that these men enjoyed every moment of it. When they finally finished murdering one of the greatest mathematicians and philosophers the ancient world had ever produced, they weren't done with her. They dragged what remained of her body through the streets to a place called Sinan and burned her there, following the traditional Alexandrian method for disposing of the worst criminals. It was symbolic annihilation, a statement that Hypatia wasn't just wrong or dangerous, but that she was pollution itself, a contaminant that needed to be erased from existence. And then these men, these holy warriors who just committed torture and murder in God's house, went back to their regular duties as if they'd done nothing more controversial than sweeping the church floors. No arrests, no trials, no punishment whatsoever. Cyril never condemned the killing, never expressed the slightest regret, never suggested that maybe, possibly, butchering a woman in a church was slightly incompatible with Christian teachings about mercy and compassion. The emperor tried, briefly, to do something about the Parabolani. The following year, Theodosius II issued an edict restricting their numbers and forbidding them from attending public events or entering courtrooms. The decree explicitly mentioned the terror they'd caused, which is ancient Roman code for, "These guys are completely out of control, and everyone is terrified." But within 2 years, Cyril had gotten the restrictions lifted, the Parabolani were back to full strength, and the emperor's attempt to impose some basic law and order collapsed like wet parchment. The patriarch had won, and everyone knew it. If you could murder the most famous philosopher in the empire, in broad daylight in a church, and face zero consequences, what couldn't you do? Hypatia's death didn't just end one woman's life. It ended an era, killed the idea that wisdom could transcend religious boundaries, that truth could be pursued without asking permission from whoever claimed to speak for God. Within months, scholars began fleeing Alexandria for Athens, Constantinople, anywhere that seemed safer than the city that had just proven it would rather burn its intellectuals than tolerate questions. The Neoplatonist school she'd led continued for a while, limping along without its brightest star, but it would never again command the respect it had when she taught there. And Cyril? He went on to become Saint Cyril of Alexandria, one of the doctors of the church, his feast day celebrated every June. The man who created the conditions for Hypatia's murder, who commanded the militia that killed her, who never expressed a moment's remorse, is officially recognized as a saint. That's the punchline to this horror story. The woman who dedicated her life to truth and knowledge was torn apart and burned, while the man responsible for her death gets prayer candles and religious devotion. The charred remnants at Sinon weren't just the end of Hypatia. They were the funeral pyre for the classical world's dying belief that maybe, just maybe, learning mattered more than dogma, that wisdom could be found anywhere, that a woman's mind could be valued for something other than its ability to stay silent and obedient. But we know how that turned out, don't we?